My name's Lawrence O'Brien. I am one of the worldwide product marketing managers in IM&G. And building on what Peter said, let's have a look at the backup and recovery market and what people are believing is going to be the change. Well, as he detailed, there's going to be growth, and it doesn't come as a massive surprise. As Peter said, it's the content that is changing, and in that it's going to bring an increase in the amount of data that is being stored, and in that is needed to be backed up and recovered. And looking at that, it's initially going to be a linear growth path to start off with, but it's going to become exponential just because, as Peter said, the actual type of data is changing significantly now, and people are storing a whole lot more of everything. If you think about it simply from the example of a mobile phone, how many albums of photos do you have prior to having a mobile phone? And how many things do you store digitally on your mobile phone now, simply as the amount of data that you're holding? So these are the backup and recovery growth that they're looking at from the analysts, and it's just going to get bigger because we're storing more stuff. So what's our strategy? Well, we've been running Data Protector for 33 years now, been in business, and in that time we've seen an enormous amount of increase of that which we do and that which we connect to. And even in this year, in 2022 that we're just going through, we launched the Data Protector for cloud workloads, which is specifically designed for the backup of cloud native information. We've seen an 18% improvement in our recovery time objectives, which is always nice, basically by the use of our integrations and the technology that we have for block-based backup. We've seen a 45% reduction in the time to backup and recover our data, and also a 50% reduction in the storage capacity requirement due to the deduplication technologies that we've invested. We've also had over 625 improvements requested by clients. So not just specifically stuff where we've gone, oh, what do we fancy doing, but actually driven as a demand from our client base. And actually with that, we have 200 plus third-party support certifications where we're actually integrating to different products to allow us to gather the data. We've had an increase in our R&D headcount and a massive increase in our partner network, driven by all our wonderful partner managers, including Bronwyn Watson in the United Kingdom. And obviously we still have a fully dedicated sales and pre-sales team covering internationally. So backup has become a business priority. Was it ever not? I think that's really a question to ask. It may not be front of house because of what people have been dealing with, because when IT works, no one worries about it. But it's always a necessity to consider what is going to be planning for the worst, because lots of things happen. Still, significantly, the number of problems are generated by human interaction. We deal with people, we work with people's data, and in that, errors do occur in the use of software. And we need to contemplate all the additional kinds of threats that we have around things like ransomware, which is seeing a significant growth in the last 5 and 10 years. Obviously, the importance of being able to recover in a specific amount of time and how far back is the recovery point for how much data I may or may not lose, and the increased complexity in the IT environment. Being in IT since I've had hair, never known it getting any simpler. It always gets more complex because we do so much more than we used to do, and we collect and utilize so much more data than we used to. And so these are just the natural progression of what is IT. And so the effect of data sprawl. So we have lots of different platforms that we're reaching to. We have lots of services that we use. And obviously in the pandemic world, we've got a dispersation, shall we say, a dispersal of the workforce, which adds its own challenges. And also the move from virtual machines to software containers is something that's starting to occur. It's not a mature technology yet, but it'll get there. And obviously from the very point of the default, shall we say, not to be argued with lawyers, but compliance is something that needs to be always considered. And as I said, SaaS solutions and having application data in different locations is something that's added to the complexity. And we're going to be using more artificial intelligence, which is always good as long as it's implemented right. So backup has become a business priority. Well, looking at the complexity of the world at the moment, this shocking diagram shows you all the different elements inside an IT system, inside the sphere of what we do. And it is certainly well worth looking at. You will be getting a copy of these slides afterwards, which is essential. But if you look specifically, when we're looking at starting to back up virtual machines and cloud-based data, these are the things that are being implemented at the moment. But with the separation of our workforce for a lot of organizations, we have now the requirement around endpoint backup, which is basically what the text will now say on the left-hand side. So this new environment brings its own challenges. It gives us the flexibility and, in fact, an increase in our productivity as individual people. I mean, I know I enjoy the fact that when it comes to Friday, I don't have to sit on a train for 2 hours. I literally take a 6-minute walk and I'm home. That's the up point. The down point is if anything goes wrong with my IT, I am now 2 hours away from my IT department. But not when I've got it all online and accessible, and certainly not when I have endpoint backup and management. Plan for the worst. Well, they always say you should plan for the worst. It's train hard and fight easy. And 80% of companies have experienced at least one system outage in the last 3 years. And I would say it's probably slightly higher than that, purely from the point of view of experiences that I have where things simply fail. An outage doesn't have to be a cataclysmic end of something. It can simply mean that your email's not being distributed at this very moment, and then in 2 or so hours it all works again. So that is something that doesn't surprise me as an individual. But also the fact that 70% of data center outages are caused by human error. That is just the nature of humanity. And you're always planning for the worst. You can never mitigate all risk because there's what's called residual risk, but you can plan as best you can. And in this, well, it says post-pandemic, I don't know that we are, but in this pandemic world that we are, businesses fundamentally rely on the fact that our workers need continuous access. And even now, I'm in a remote location contacting a platform that you're all in as well. And this is the stuff that we are used to. It's just part of what we do as work, but these things need to be considered when it comes to dealing with backup and recovery. So you need to mitigate the gaps found in this, but you're still going to have residual risk, and that's why you have service level agreements, is what can be reasonably attained in the budget as well as the time you have available. Contemplating all kinds of threats. Well, obviously there's always an increase in malware because there's a whole industry around being able to separate you from your hard-earned cash. And in that, you will always see a growth in malware, and you should always be aware of it and certainly signed up to reading about these changes as an industry. But it is the last line of defense, but it shouldn't be the only line of defense. You should consider other things to deal with in an organization when you're making sure you're on the latest OS versions. And I know this sounds as a really old message, patching, latest OSs, making sure you're reporting, doing log analysis. This is stuff I learned when I started in IT, but it's just as important now as it's always been. And obviously you've got to have the backup tool that integrates with all the different solutions that you're using and making sure that you're paying attention to it. And consider things like where the physical topology of your backup software is, your backup technology, physically looking at where it is from a point of view of privileged access management. You don't want just a fancy lock on the front of the house. It might be necessary to have locks on more of the doors. So the importance of RPO and RTO. So being able to see that most businesses, 3 in 5, is not confident that they will meet the service level objectives to do a full recovery system of their full recovery of their systems and their data is concerning, because it means that you're not practicing. You know, one of the earliest problems I dealt with in backup was with an accountant's firm that was backing up every single day. They put a 5¼ inch floppy in. I know, it was that long ago. And they would do a backup every day and they would store it in a lever arch file, but it never worked. And when I went to see them, they'd done the backup, hole punched the disk and stored it in a lever arch file. And as soon as they hole punched it, they rendered it entirely useless because they never tested it. They never realized that was a problem. And that's why you need to test it and test your stuff to make sure it works. Central monitoring and being able to predict what happens, automated schedule restore tests, because you want to make sure these things work, because finding out your Zoom doesn't work 10 minutes before you're doing a presentation is not the time to find out that your Zoom doesn't work. And remember, for every pound that you invest in hardware and software, you should really consider spending it on training as well to make sure you get all the value out of your software products, in fact, all your products. And remember that they should be aligned to meet your SLAs. Yeah, making sure that what the expectation of the business is the expectation of what you've implemented. Okay, so increased complexity, right? Well, we're all moving to the cloud, and not a lot of people are only using one cloud provider. And certainly the hybrid and multi-cloud intentions is certainly where people are going. Whether you've got a sales platform, the CRM solution, your support desk solution, your office system, that sort of stuff, we're all using these systems. As Peter said, you know, booking train tickets, you know, purchasing items, we use lots of different platforms. So it's not going to be, it's unstoppable. Now, it's not meant to sound like it's something bad. It's just that this is what it is, and it's going to get there. Convenience of being able to sit, respond to a Teams message on your mobile phone, sitting on your sofa of an evening while you're waiting for your food delivery to arrive, which you ordered on the same phone, is just technology that exists now, and it's not going to go away. And so you have to make sure that your backup tool is able to deal and address all those different types of infrastructure. Okay, and that's just planning and making sure that you choose the right product. And on-premise backup and disaster recoveries, increasingly, and that's not easy to say when you're doing a presentation, they're leveraging cloud destinations. Okay, and you end up with hybrid topologies. So being able to centrally report, deduplicate, so you're not moving stuff unnecessarily, and being able to show that you can do restores is definitely something that you should always be looking at. And that's added to by the effect of data sprawl. As Peter said, a ridiculous amount of data is being generated, and it clearly is required because it's only going to get bigger. And so that means it's a colossal amount of data is going to be stored in the cloud, and you need to be able to deal with it. And those solutions and services are going to be shifting from CapEx, because you're not buying it outright, to operational expense. And it's going to be a continuing amount of backup and software as a service. And cloud providers, you must understand, don't provide the backup the users need to comply. It does say complain, and users occasionally do, and they're justified with internal and external policies. Yeah, I've got my data, it's in the cloud, I don't have to back it up, is not actually true. And I don't have to archive it. That's not true either. These things you still have to do because you are individually, as an organization, responsible for your data. So there's a move to software containers. So we're seeing a shift over to organizations using containerized applications. And that means that it's moving away from virtual machines. And this is not something that's going to be instantaneous, right? It's not going to be, it's here today and it's gone tomorrow. And there's still going to be a continuing spread of private clouds in the USA. And with this, you need to know that your backup tool is capable of protecting both virtual containers and also VMs as it trends over. Compliance by default, we've seen the fines, and two of these organizations are in fact one company. Your backup tool is not there to provide GDPR compliance, but it should give you access to be able to secure your communications, to ensure that it's encrypted on rest as well as on the fly. So when your data is moving, it should be secured. You can use topology and technology to keep your data immutable, which stops stuff being interrupted. You need to use common criteria compliance and have an understanding. And as I mentioned earlier, privileged access management and role-based access control is essential. So, such a lot of information, so little time. So use of data, and certainly SaaS data loss, is something that you need to be aware of. Many users are misinformed and they can lose things, and that's understandable. But being able to return that information to them is essential for what you're doing. So backup recovery, which is an unrecognized problem that enterprise needs to start addressing. But they tend to address it when it starts happening, and really you should plan ahead for that. So it's a different approach. You have to use different tools than you do for on-prem backup, or use a tool that actually can do both of those to be able to merge them into centralized management. Artificial intelligence. Okay, it's going to get bigger. There's going to be more of it, and it's going to be useful. And that's the sort of stuff that you need to be aware of, not to fear it, but to understand that organizations are going to increasingly be using this sort of stuff, and you need to be aware of that. And it's just going to utilize machine learning and backup to be able to dynamically allocate resource, detect when stuff is being attacked, be able to automate against your business policies. So what you promise is what you deliver, and when things fail, you recover, and then be able to do those adjustments and predictions and integrate with your service management agreements with automated tiering to make sure that the right technology is being used at the right time to store that specific piece of data. So how's that for a whistle-stop tour of what's going on? Know your data, know where it's stored, know what the agreements are of where your information is. Make sure you control it and understand it and test it now, so that if something happens, and it may well, it doesn't become an ongoing problem that's going to be something to steal your joy and peace. It should be something that be able to aid you for a good night's sleep because you've planned ahead.